I, I didn't start thinking about me having to speak here until like 3 days ago, and I'm like, damn, like so much has gone on. Like there's been so many passages just in the past couple of weeks in my life. Um, like before, I always looked at things as like, oh my God, this is happening. What am I gonna do? You know, like that inability to like solve, or conquer situations in my life. But like in the past, I don't know, maybe like months, there's been like a succession of things that have gone on, and now in retrospect, looking back, they were like big deals, and I kind of like just kind of went through them, and we deal with life on life's terms, and that's what's happened to me because of the steps of the program. I'm able to deal with life on life's terms today, with traveling and not being home a lot and having hurricanes and having people staying in my house and, just like friends that need me or whatever. I'm able to do those things and not fall apart or not give up so much of me that there's nothing left of me anymore. And that's because I think of the steps and work in the steps of the program. I was thinking, like, do you talk about, like, it's an H&I weekend. I mean, do I talk about, like, the hospitals I've been in or the institutions I do H&I work in or, like, how I felt and everything? And what's coming to my mind just sitting here was when my first drug run, I was, like, 14 years old. It was, like, the beginning and, like, the end of my first drug run. I grew up in the metropolitan area of New York, and I started using drugs the year of like Woodstock, and I went from like smoking pot to shooting heroin in like 90 days, and I remember going into at that time we used to cop in the South Bronx, and it was me, and I always did my drugs with a lot of men, older men, and we went to go pick up someone who had been arrested for copping. And we were downtown in Manhattan, and a cop took me into the Tombs. And he said, if you continue using, this is what you're going to be. And I thought it was a joke, because I came from middle-class suburbia. I was an only child. I went to private schools. I was still going to summer camp, and I was at that point a visitor in addiction. Like I was like a bystander that watched, addicts, really. And I never took it seriously. And I remember going into the Tombs and like seeing people kicking in cells and stuff and just thinking, isn't this exciting? Not like thinking about like what it meant or the seriousness of it or anything, just like what a big joke that this was. And yeah, I know that addicts end up here. Sure, addicts like that are poor, and I had like all these things are running through my head, never realizing that could be me. Never once even accepting that thought. And I stopped using probably about a year and a half later, chemicals, and I ended up coming down here to Florida and spending about a good 8 or 10 years not really using chemicals that much. I mean, I used like everything else in the meanwhile. I used to use a lot of things. I used food, I used men, whatever, like money. I was like obsessed with the idea that like more money, the reason why I had problems and the reason why I couldn't cope with my life situations was because I didn't have enough money. That if I had enough money to pay people to take care of all of these things, I wouldn't have the problems that I have, And I began to become obsessive and compulsive in overachievement and wanting more money and more status and more things and more cars and more better addresses, better social people, and I did that down here, and I was like really successful, really young. When I was involved in the relationship at the time, and when my relationship was bad, I just worked harder. And when my job was worse, I just thrived more on my relationship. And I don't know, like everything I did to the point of it being all-consuming. I didn't know any kind of gray areas. I didn't know moderation. I did not know balance in my life. I had no way of judging things other than outside, and how they looked. I had no innate qualities inside of me that could feel. I felt fear most of the time, and or anguish, I would say. And everything, fear was my main motivator in life. It kept me going, and it always like in a forward kind of perpetual motion. I didn't stop ever, because if I stopped, I would have to think about how I really felt, and that scared me greater than the fear of keeping going. So I just kept on going, and everything around me was I don't know, it was like I grew up in a house where I basically grew up alone. I was an only child, and my parents were not that they weren't loving and caring, they were. It's just that they didn't give me attention, or they didn't give me any kind of skills or maturing skills. Like I did not. The only time I knew how things work through process of elimination. I was always told what not to do. I was never told how to do anything. I was always told when I shouldn't feel that way, or I shouldn't be that way, but I was never shown how to be, at all. I could never remember like having any kind of positive role models in my life. My father was an alcoholic who, he never drank, really that much, but he had like all the shuns of addiction, like he was emotionally unavailable, and his solution to everything was like writing a check or buying something. That's how he solved the problems of our household. And when he wasn't doing it, he would just back off, and my mother would solve it. And because my mother virtually ran our house, her only out was always to get sick then. That was her escape. So between my father being totally unavailable and my mother, getting like these psychosomatic illnesses on a monthly basis, I ended up being alone. And because of that, I didn't have any of those coping skills, I did not go through the maturation process. I did not mature into an adult, My value system when I was in my early 20s was totally based on materialism, totally. Had nothing to do with like qualities in a personality or anything like that. Everything became everyone and everything was evaluated on how much and what they can do for me. That was it. And that's how I lived. And I lived that way for a long time without chemicals. And it wasn't only until like those things stopped working for me again that I picked up chemicals again. And it was about 10 years later. And I used, I picked up, I must have been either 26 or 27. And I picked up, and in about 30 days I hit a bottom. I was hitting an emotional bottom when I picked up, and I've come to find that out now. And when I did pick up, it was like I never stopped using. I might as well have been using those past 10 years, because I hit a bottom so quick and so fast. When it came to unmanageability, it was like my disease, like, wasn't even like a kidnap. It was like it just grabbed me by the neck, and I was gone. It was like a hook. And it pulled me over, and it was over. It was just over. I checked out of life, literally. And for the next, 2-3 years, I didn't know who the president was. I didn't know what movies were out. I didn't know anything, because all I did was use. And when I wasn't using, I was getting money to use. And that was my life. It was the beginning and using and finding ways and means of getting more. And I had thought, well, I had friends, and they worked and they'd take off a year, and they'd sail around Australia, or, they'd do something. And I thought, well, I'll take off a year and I'll shoot heroin. and it made total sense to me. It was like there was nothing wrong with that statement in my mind. It made total sense to me that I deserve this. I had worked hard for this. I had enough money to do this. Nobody really had to know what I was doing, and I'm going to do this. And I did. Except after the year was over, I couldn't stop. And at that point, I think I used for like another year and a half, and Louie and I moved from New York. We came down here again, because at that point I was back in New York again, and we just used and kept using and using and using, and finally, I hit a physical bottom. I didn't have like a spiritual awakening, and I didn't have a moment of clarity. Then I had a very bad physical bottom where I couldn't get high anymore, basically, and I started convulsing a lot. And I had used every available vein in my body. I looked like a road map. I looked horrible, pathetic. I used to think, wouldn't it be great, not to ever have to worry about getting money to get high? And really, for the most part of our active addiction, we had enough money to get high. And it's very frightening when you can do that much damage to yourself and not even realize it. I had stopped looking in the mirror. I didn't know what I looked like anymore. I knew intellectually what I looked like. Emotionally, like I couldn't probably accept for how bad I really looked, so I stopped looking in the mirror. And I ended up going into the hospital, into I guess, it was a treatment center, and I spent 6 weeks on a locked unit, and it was very comforting for me to know that unit was locked and I couldn't get out, and I needed like a rest. I really did. And I didn't want to be able to walk out the doors, I wanted to have all kinds of blockages around me to stop me from me, because I knew how I was with a chemical in my body, and I knew how I was when I had an obsession to use, and it was there. I had known about Narcotics Anonymous. I had, in 1982, I was living in New York, and my friends called me from, I used to go to France a lot to buy my dope, and my friend called me, and from Paris, and he said, some people I know are going to be in New York. They're going to this convention in Narcotics Anonymous. You should really go and talk to them. And I didn't think, even at that point, I had a problem. It was kind of like being in the tombs again in Manhattan when I was a kid. And I said, why should I go talk to them? You want me to like take them out to dinner or something? And like I didn't even put it together that he was like saying, you should talk about like your drug usage with these people, Katie. And we never ended up going there. I remember we were going to go there, and we said, let's go get high first. And we never got there. And it was like another lost weekend, week, month, year, whatever. And so I had known about Narcotics Anonymous, but it was through the hospital I was in that I went to like meetings regularly and kind of began to be receptive to this way of life. Because even at that point, I never thought like about not using, And like, I don't know, like I remember very little in like my first 3 years clean. Never mind like what happened to me in the hospital, but I remember them taking us out, and I went to this the Friday night meeting at Pinewood Lodge at that time. Like, and a lot of people from Dade and Broward used to go to that meeting when there weren't that many meetings still down here. And this woman saw me that had seen me before, and she said to me, "Your eyes are different. You're gonna hang around this time. You look different." And I guess like what had happened is that somewhere along the line I like surrendered. And I was, I didn't know, I wasn't about like evaluating this program or the people or any of that stuff. All I knew is that what I what I had been doing definitely did not work, and I didn't want to live with me anymore with chemicals in me. I knew that I was deathly afraid of that person. And I am to this day. I am so afraid of me when I put a chemical in my body, because I will do anything. I will do anything to get more. And I know that. I will forsake anything. I know how angry, how vicious, how malicious, how ruthless I will get, and how my brain just never stops. The voices don't stop when I have a chemical in my body. Or when I'm really in any kind of addiction. But chemicals got my attention, and I use chemicals a lot, because they're the best example for me when I talk about my addictions. They're the most obvious, and they were the most humiliating. And I'm to this day, I always remember. They say, remember your last day using, and I do. There isn't a day that hasn't gone by in my recovery that I don't remember that day. I don't remember, I got up that morning, and I went down to the little crack house, and I got my dope, my 2 dopes and a Coke, as Louis says, and stepped over bodies, and picked a dirty needle out, and got off before I would go to the hospital, and sat there in the darkness with people sleeping all over the floors to get high. That's what I did, because I couldn't even go into treatment without a chemical in my body. I couldn't do it. I couldn't fill out the application. And I make, the longer I stay clean, the more I realize, how grandiose, I've made my addiction to be, even in my first 4th step, or even my second one for that matter, it's we're either so bad, we're just so bad when we use our drugs, and I was pathetic. I was despicable. There was nothing cool, and there was nothing nice, and there was nothing attractive about me as a drug addict. There was not one thing that I can think of that was attractive. I can, even with my money or with whatever that I had, there was nothing attractive about me. And I know that today, And I went through, I'm in a way, in a mourning period for that. There's a sadness that I'm going through, that I hated myself that much, that I could hate myself that much to do that to myself, because nobody did it to me but me. Nobody did that to me but me. And I've come to really understand addiction, and being powerless and what that meant. And knowing, today I also know, I've gone through a couple of incest crises. So I was obviously looking for something to fix me most of my adolescent and part of my adult life. I mean, there was obviously something that was so terrible inside of me that I was trying to just, not that I ever remembered it until 2 years ago, but it was still there in me, and I was always on this run to run away from it, and never even knowing what it was until 2 years ago, and to be that self-destructive. And it's funny, but I do the same thing with everything else. I can do it with work, and I can do it with money. I've done it in sexual relationships. I've done it in non-sexual relationships, where I pick something and I just self-destruct with it. I just take it to such extremes and in such magnitude, and blow it up into such proportions in my life that I destroy myself with it, and I self-destruct. And by me self-destructing, I take everything down around me with it, because I don't know the boundaries and I don't know the balance. And that's what addiction is for me, It's taking anything like that and hurting with it, in any way, shape, or form. And that's what I do. And I've gotten better over the years, and if anything, I'm more aware of it, but I'm not by any way, shape, or form well with it either, even in recovery, by the time I was right in my second, 4th step, it was about in recovery. And I could not blame anymore a lot of my active addiction or chemicals for my behaviors. And there was there's periods, that I have to I had to look at and really take responsibility for. And I began to understand more and more about what addiction really meant, you know, and what it means in my life today, because I still have the disease of addiction. I still have it, you know. I mean, I saw that smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. I'm HIV positive, had pneumonia. I mean, what do I need, you know, to tell me I should not be smoking cigarettes? And yet, up until a month ago, I smoked almost 3 packs of cigarettes a day. And it's like, what kind of people do that to themselves? You know, and somebody said something to me, Mary Lou said it to me, that somebody said to her in the program that all the people that smoke have, if you look around, you'll see all of them have low self-esteem. And it was like, my ego could not deal with that. You know, it really couldn't. It really couldn't. It was like, I'm like almost 8 years clean. I'm supposed to have a little self-esteem, you know, but there I was smoking and hurting myself. And I believed it. I mean, anybody who smokes doesn't have to believe that, but I believed it, and it rang true in my ears anyway. And I, you know, and knowing that, even knowing that, like, I would be uncomfortable, knowing all the things I know about addiction and how I have gone through so many addictions, you know, up until this point in my life, I was filled with the same fear and the same apprehensions and the same denial systems and the same everything with cigarettes as I was with my dope, everything. And I do that with everything. Everything. I'll do it with work when I'm working 12 hours a day, or I'm rationalizing, like not being home enough, you know, and I go into that denial in a heartbeat, you know, or when I'm not eating right, you know, and I go right into my denial. Because like now, I've got my brain working again, which is very dangerous for me. It is. It's very dangerous, because that's always been one of my weapons. You know, I can intellectualize, and I can go into such rationale. You know, I'll talk myself into anything, and you, and take you with me, you know, and I'll have you believe in what I'm saying, you know, and that works real well in work. It don't work real well in recovery. You know, it works real well when I want to sell you something. But I have to be very careful of how I think, you know, and my thinking process. For a long time in these rooms, I walked around going, I don't know. And, I mean, I had an answer. I could have given you 3 answers. But I had to do that. I had to say, I don't know, for almost 3 years in here, because I was afraid to know. I was afraid to know. Not that I was afraid to take responsibility. I was afraid to have an opinion. Because as soon as I had an opinion, I had power. And when I had power, I'm thinking of Scarface. I mean, as soon as I give myself that power, then I begin to have answers. And I can't have any answers. I can't have any answers today about anything. You know, I go and I kind of like, when I first got clean, I kind of put my toolbox away, you know. Like there were jobs that I could have had, and there were people that I were friends of mine that if I started hanging around with them, or if I started taking those jobs, I would have gotten back too many things too quick for me, you know. And I knew that those were like triggers for me. I knew that. And I knew that if I went into any way, shape, or form, and the same lifestyle that I had lived previous to this program, that I was living again like in my will. And I was afraid of that. I didn't want to live. I didn't want to be in any way the person that I was before I came here. So for a long time in these rooms, it was like I didn't do the things I used to do. I didn't say the things I used to say. I was not the person that I ever was. And it was very uncomfortable for me, you know. I went through a series of, I would say, like 3 major identity crises here. Major ones. Like, I did not know who I was. I didn't know what I liked, what I didn't like. And it was good for me, because it was part of kind of like a shedding process. I was getting rid of a lot of garbage without even knowing it. You know, that I had been carrying for years. You know, I had believed for so long, so many lies inside of me, that I didn't know what the truth was and what wasn't the truth anymore. I didn't know what qualities I liked in a person and what I didn't like. I didn't know what I really wanted to do for a living and what I didn't. you know, because everything I did up until that point either was like an instant gratification kind of thing or gave me a lot of money. You know, that's like what motivated me before. I didn't know what integrity was, you know, to feel it. I knew what it meant. I can give you the dictionary, you know, kind of definition of it, but I didn't know what it felt like to have integrity, to have soundness of mind. I mean, I knew what it was like to run on fear. I knew what it was like to get over on you. I knew what it was like to fight, because every day I woke up ready for a fight. Every day. You know. And finally, in recovery, I began to go through like a surrender, and I still go through it. It's like, it's not like I made a decision and I surrendered and it was over, you know. For me, every day I stay in recovery is part of my like surrender process, because I had built up for so long this like monster, you know, that I did not know anymore who I was or what I was, what I liked and what I didn't like. So I walked around with no opinion for a long time, and it was in that time period that I began to build up my own, I guess, quality of life. You know, well, I began to value that was important in my life, because I didn't know, you know, and I had a new value system, you know, and it took years. Of like what I wanted, what I didn't want, what I liked, what I didn't like, and it's still going on. It's like I got the basics down, and I've been building ever since. But it's taken a long time for me to become a whole person in this program, you know? And once I was like this whole person, I was like this whole empty person, really, you know? And I remember a lot of my H&I work initially was 9-step work for me. It was like my payback, because I had worked for a lot of big companies and taken large sums of money from them, and and without having to go back to them and go to jail, I did a lot of institution work and a lot of like charity stuff, because I didn't know how else to do it, basically. And that was my way of giving back. And what I began to, and I always go back. I mean, ever since I think I've had like 30 days clean, I remember my sponsor at the time started taking me to Fort Lauderdale jail, and I wasn't allowed to talk or anything, but I used to go on Sunday nights to the Fort Lauderdale jail. And then I started, when they built the new jail downtown, I started that meeting. And then I went to the Pompano Detention Center. And from the Pompano Detention Center, I went to the women's prison. And on and off for the past 5 years, I've been going now to the women's prison. And I started the step meeting there. And it isn't like I go there and I get grateful that I'm not there. I don't know what it is about why I go to jail, you know. I know that I have to go there, though. And I know that it's like, there's certain things like I have to do, and that's such a part of my recovery now. It's like I have to do H&I work, and primarily in jails and in prisons. At some point, whether it doesn't even have to be like a weekly thing, but I have to be involved in some kind of institution work. I have to be. And it keeps me clean. In the sense is, and you know, it's like I have to go to a meeting. I have to have a sponsor. It's the same thing for me. And I don't know what the explanation is behind it. And all I know is that it's healing a part of me. By doing that work, it's healing a part of me. And as long as that part of me gets healed, then there's less likelihood for me ever to be there. You know, because I've always found that out in like my 9-step work. Is like if I'm truly honest about the amends that I'm making, that part of me becomes healed and I won't repeat. You know, it's like it's just not there anymore to be sick about. And I really like going into the prisons. It's kind of like hanging out in the South Bronx to me. You know, and like there's still, you know, and that is a sick part of me, and it's part of my addiction. It's like I like the thrill of things, you know, not necessarily the agony of defeat, but no, really, but like I like those kind of thrills, and it's good for me, you know, and I've learned like consistency in my life about showing up. And I've learned that I don't always do things because I want them or because they feel good, that I have to go there sometimes when I don't want to go, and I have to go when they are being assholes, because they could be ripping assholes in those places, including the inmates. And really, because like I remember when we started the women's meeting in downtown Fort Lauderdale in the new jail. I went for 3 months with the H&I chair on Tuesdays at 7:30, and we sat there at 7:30 every Tuesday for 3 months when they first opened, and no one ever came downstairs to come and get us. And it took 3 months till finally they got the message that we weren't going to go away. And Juliet and I would sit there and we'd wait and wait and wait, and they would like come maybe once in that hour period, to see, if we were still there, or say, well, we're going to get somebody, and they would never come until finally they started coming and sending somebody downstairs to bring us upstairs. And that was like, practice that kind of patience, and when you're doing something. And I thought about that. It was like I was there because of Narcotics Anonymous. And me, with my mouth and my ego, my attitude, and all this other stuff that I am, would have told this man a long time ago to kiss off, But because I was there for NA, I couldn't say that. Because then NA would be judged, So I've like learned this whole other dimension of behavior because of Narcotics Anonymous. Even when other people are wrong. Even when I am right, I don't necessarily have to tell people anymore how right I am. And that was like always a big deal to me, like I had to prove to you how right I was. There was a major issue in like my recovery. And I don't have to do that. And I've learned that in my institution work because I've dealt with a lot of correctional officers view us the same as they do inmates, have the same attitudes about us. I don't know, out of ignorance, whatever, but I have come across that where like we're viewed the same way and treated the same way. And a lot of my ego, boy, it pushes some big time buttons in me. But I've also been able to identify it and really look at them and find out what it is that's like makes me the way that I get so defiant and I get so righteous, around these kind of like authoritative figures. And I don't know. It's like I still do this meeting at BCI, and I haven't been able to be there a lot lately. But there's people in there. I don't know. Like there's a lot of women that I know in that prison that are there for life, and they have taught me patience in a lot of ways. They're by having the sentences that they have, they view life differently. And like being an instant kind of gratification person I am, and listening to their rationale about things has taught me more patience. And not like with people necessarily, but like about life. Like patience with life. And knowing like how things will just come to pass, and like it's like another passage to go through. Rather than like that hurry up and wait syndrome that I've always been in my whole life, I was like, we got to get this on, like that's been me, to finish something. It's more important to get it finished than anything. And I missed the whole process in the meantime. I missed that whole process of living in the meantime because I'm in such a rush to get to the end. And I've learned in my recovery more about quality than quantity. And I really like am more involved in that today than anything about what's like important to me and in my life and what I make choices on a daily basis of what's going to be in my life, not like what I think you're evaluating me on or what I think society is as a whole or what I should have, at X amount of years old with this kind of education, whatever, just what I want. And how I want it, and what my plan is to go about getting it. Because before, like, I just wanted things and I never had a plan. And then I would get my expectation would be let down totally because I never planned. and therefore I would never get it. You know, so instead of setting myself up in like those kind of trick bags anymore, I've gone into really like an evaluative stage in my life, you know, like where it's like I'm doing like almost like an inventory of my life and where I want it to go and how I want it to be and the choices that I have and what's realistic, what isn't realistic, what can happen next year, what can happen 5 years from now, that kind of thing. And not so much that it's got to happen or else I'll fall apart and dissipate, you know, but that this is like more or less my goals and objectives kind of thing. And it gives me a security, you know, because I was like always like this like free spirit kind of person, you know, that was highly insecure, and it's like that's a direct contradiction. You know, like to be this total, like I fell in love with images. I don't know about you all, but like I fell in love with images in my adolescence, and like I wanted to be a lot of different kinds of people, you know. And the problem is that I wasn't my own person. So it was kind of hard to want to be all these other things, not even knowing who I was. And what's happened now is like I know who I am. So, like, it's okay. I've set my own image of myself. It's like I don't have to use somebody else's anymore. Because that was, like, such a setup for me, you know. I wanted to be vice president by the time I was 40 of a major corporation. And I was on the way, you know. I was, like, there. I was, like, near director at 27, you know. And the problem is that me, the person, wasn't that at all. In the reality of things, I couldn't care less about corporate life. I didn't know it, but I wanted to be that, you know. I wanted to be an intellectual and be part of like the cafe set, you know what I mean? And hung around with all of those people. Except the problem is that I didn't really like that lifestyle and never knew it, you know. And like I have gone around wanting to be all of these images of people in my life, never, and spent all that time and energy doing that instead of trying to figure out who the hell I was and what I wanted, you know. It was like that label stuff. Put that label on and wear it, you know, and worry about who you are later on. And I don't know, it's like through working the steps and going through them a few times now, I've come to have like my semblance of self, you know, and I've come to have an understanding of a power greater than myself, and you know, keeping that source open, you know, and keeping it like my positive force in my life that helps me through all of these things that go on, and you know, that I have absolutely no control over. It was only here I realized like people did things and they didn't necessarily do them to me, they just did them. You know, and that I wasn't the center of the universe that way. Like, I used to get devastated by people, and how could they do that to me? Well, they didn't necessarily do it to me. They just did it. You know, and there's a difference. There's a difference, and I had choices about the people I was going to be around and allow those things to be done to me, and whether I was willing to accept the consequences of that relationship or not. And the more I've been here, the more, you know, at peace I've been. And that's all I ever wanted when I got here, was just to be. I remember that. I just wanted to stop shaking, stop sweating. I just wanted to be. And that's like what the steps have given me. And I really, you know, for whatever reasons, you know, I'm just grateful to be here and to have this time here. And to know, like, that I don't have to be the person I was that got clean, you know? I don't have to be the person I was last year in recovery, that I can continually change, you know? That I don't have to have the same attitude I had last month even about things or life or whatever. And that it's there for me and for my choosing, you know, when I'm ready. And work the steps, you know, on a daily basis and go through the process, you know? It's like... it's given me such freedom. You know, we talk about being in hospitals and institutions and everything, but the steps have given me such freedom in my life that I you know, it's like hard to even verbalize what really happens in that process if you take advantage of it. You know, you can't really put into words what really happens to you, like when you go from point A to point B in recovery, you know, and the feelings that evolve, and the person that we become. But it happens, and I'm just grateful to be here. Thanks.